Now I invite Professor Rajendra Kumar Debe from Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Mocha, Mauritius. Please give a hand, big hand.
Professor Bhatt, Chairperson of the ICPR and of this session, members of the public and professors, respected professors and academics, it's a great pleasure for me to be here among you. My paper will, to a certain extent, complement and overlap what Professor Professor Murthy has presented on Malaysia, because I'm going to speak on Indian philosophy as it is lived in Mauritius. So my paper is entitled Mauritius as an Outpost of Indian Philosophy, Religion and Culture, a Unique Experiment of Transformation. Mauritius as an outpost of Indian civilization were the words used by Dr. S. Radhakrishnan back in the 1930s when he wanted to send a message of hope and courage to his Indian compatriots settled in this far-off island called Mauritius. Preserving and perpetuating one's cultural and religious practices, customs and traditions, beliefs and value system is vital in maintaining one's identity. The struggle led by Indian immigrants in Mauritius to keep alive the umbilical cord which united them with India and the Asian continent resulted in a rare experiment in the history of philosophy and religion. Despite a balance of economic and political power that was to their disadvantage, the Indian immigrants, pejoratively called coolies, brought to work as indentured laborers, demonstrated resilience by adopting the new country and transforming it into a replica of their own motherland. They also exhibited firm resistance to proselytism and other acculturation strategies by seeking refuge in the ancient Indian traditions of thought. They resorted to the values and principles which are implicit in their scriptures and explicit in their day-to-day life, and infused thereby a new dynamism into what we may call Indianness. In this paper, an attempt will be made to argue that Indian philosophy, the source of religious and cultural values in many parts of Asia, is a living and flourishing movement in Mauritius, thanks to the relentless efforts made by these migrants. To get a holistic picture, the historical and geographical context need to be grasped. Mauritius is a mascarene island situated in the southern part of the Indian Ocean, midway between the African and the Asian continents. The first settlers were, on the other hand, the Dutch, who introduced sugarcane. After the Dutch, the French came, and the British took possession of the island from the French, and since then, Mauritius is, in 1968, Mauritius got its independence. But we have had a very unique historical background because several European countries had colonized and had brought slaves and workers there. The abolition of slavery in 1835 sounded the death knell for the sugar-based economy of Mauritius, which depended heavily on this cheap mode of labor. Pressurized by French planters, the British East India Company found the perfect solution, the introduction of indentured labor. The quality of Indian laborers were known to the French, exceptionally docile and perseverant as they were. With the slaves now refusing to work in all colonies around the world, Indians appeared as an economically viable and immediate solution. However, the sheer number of labor force required was astounding. Such a migration-based indentured labor and on such a massive scale was never attempted before. However, the proximity between the Indian subcontinent and Mauritius persuaded the British to experiment with indentured labor on a trial basis. They triggered a chain of events, a wave of economic migration, the repercussions of which were so unpredictable that they are still unfolding now. It became known as the Great Experiment. Between 1835 and 1923, the flow of immigrants sailing from the ports of Calcutta and Madras continuously disembarked at Port Louis in Mauritius at a place now famously called the Apravasi Ghat or Kuli Ghat and proclaimed a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Many came under some form of compulsion, some fleeing natural catastrophes, famine and epidemics, came with hopes of a better life, others with the greed of finding gold beneath stones. By 1939, the year when immigration finally ended, there were already 500,000 of them on the island, constituting thereafter the majority of the population. Disillusionment, however, upon arrival, however, the promised life did not meet the expectation of the migrants. Even before landing at the Ghat, many, especially the weak and the sick, died at sea. Not used to prolonged maritime life, they could not resist the stress of the long voyage. To the crews carrying them, they were nothing but cattle, merchandise being delivered. Not respecting their part of the contract, the humiliating and inhumane treatment they subjected their passengers to forced some to suicidal leaps in the ocean. Their ordeals, however, did not end with the voyage. Upon arrival, the freshly landed immigrants were sent to specially designated locations called camps, or camps in French. While in their mind they carried all the facets and elements of their intangible heritage, yet among the rudimentary belongings they could bring, many did not forget to include the Ramcharitmanas and the Bhagavad Gita, two of the most comprehensive ambassadors of Indian philosophy, religion, and culture. Despite the host of facilities promised in indenture contracts, life was not easy in these settlements, often in the middle of sugarcane fields. The abject poverty and the absence of basic amenities made day-to-day living a torment difficult to be borne. Yet, despite these adverse conditions of their existence, there gleamed in the hearts and minds of these brave Indian men and women the spirit of tolerance and attitude characteristic of what Indian values stand for. It is in the trials and tribulations of life that man discovers the true meaning of being human and the ultimate goal of life. For this reason, Indian philosophy has often been wrongly qualified as being fatalistic and pessimistic. Yet, these are what have really molded the Indian spirit and endowed it with resilience and strength on the face of adversities. However, one need not embark upon the study of Indian philosophy to acquire them. They are present in the collective consciousness of all Indians and are expressed in the popular literature available in India, like the epics, the Puran, the Gita, and the Manas. The practical application of these principles were demonstrated by the coolies in Mauritius. One of the important features of Indian philosophy is belief in the world as being a moral stage where man needs to perfect himself ethically before he can aspire for spiritual realization. Swami Vivekananda once noted that in Indian villages, one can come across people who, though not educated, are yet profoundly cultured. This is so because the very nature of Indian philosophy is that it is highly practical and life-affirming. Gautam Buddha, for instance, echoed this Indian attitude towards life when he stated Sarvam Dukham in his first noble truth. It did not imply shying away from misery and suffering, but instead facing them with all the wisdom and strength of mind embodied in the darshanas. It must be remembered that the Indian peasant, even in the remotest of places, had access to the wisdom revealed in the Vedas and the Upanishads, mainly through the visits of drama troupes and wandering monks. The Brahmacharya Sukta in the Atharva Veda describes how the brahmachari moves swiftly from east to west, gathering people and edifying them with his ennobling sermons. When the fact is considered that at one point of time, there was not more than 10 purohit, or priests for a population of 1.5 lakh immigrants, the question that begs itself is, how did they manage to practice, preserve, and promote their faith? The argument being proposed is that the Indian laborers who came to Mauritius were not as ignorant and ill-equipped as one may think. They were already endowed with a Vedic and Vedantic outlook embedded in the Indian identity. The conditions prevalent in the island served, therefore, both as a catharsis and a catalyst. They compelled an actualization of their ancient wisdom and a recourse to cultural devices available therein in order to face the existential dilemmas life threw them into. The immigrants emulated, therefore, what prior to them was already carried out, amongst others, by Shankara, Ramanuj, Tulsidas, Maharshi Dayanand, and Mahatma Gandhi. The last two, it is worth mentioning, had particularly inspired the immigrants. The latter, Satyagraha, and the former's Satyartha Prakash, had emboldened their resolve to stand against adharma. In so doing, they enabled the preservation and propagation of values and knowledge held in the popular scriptures. Acknowledging the quasi-inevitable eventuality of not making back to their native land, the coolies resolved to adopt this new land as their Matribhumi. Looking at the silver lining of hope rather than at the dark clouds of despair, they resolved to transform it into from a land of exploitation and misery into a country of opportunities and happiness. It began with a mutation of the labor camps into genuine human habitations. In many respects, every village in Mauritius now mirrors its counterpart in India. There is a Shivala in the hill, there is a Kalimai on the outskirts of the village, a Smashan Bhumi, and ghats on riversides, all of which are evidences of the replication of Indian culture and tradition as expressed in rural India. Religious practices belonging to both mainstream exoteric Hinduism and the more secretive esoteric or tantric were performed there. Even the traditional social structure was duplicated. Each village had its carpenter, jeweler, a craftsman, priest, a cleaner. Association called mandalis were also set up, where the Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana were chanted and the philosophical themes discussed. The traditional panchayat took the form of Baitka, where the elders of the other communities took important decisions pertaining to their culture and traditions. Thus, gradually, the Indian way of life got so perfectly transplanted in Mauritius that many refer to it as Little India or Greater India. The migratory wave was no doubt beneficent to the economy, but it posed an equally challenging problem from sociological and religious perspective. The influx of migrants had brought with it not only much needed labor, but also social norms and customs, cultural practices, and religious beliefs that were foreign to the land. Appalled at the sight of some of them, amused by others, but generally disdainful towards their ritualistic practices, which they labeled as paganism, the French and the British soon realized the need to civilize the coolies. The success met with the Christianization of the slave population had convinced their former masters that these Indian illiterates were no different, and soon they would be joining the ranks of the African Christians in churches around the island. Missionaries from all schools of Christianity threw themselves into an unbridled race of proselytism, eager to assimilate the uneducated mass of immigrants into their respective folds. Catholics, Adventists, Protestants, and Anglicans all wanted a share of this bounty. While the French wielded economic power, the British had political control, and both exerted their influence in pushing defenseless migrants towards Christianity. It was a conversion by coercion, animated by a fierce spirit of competition. One missionary, Reverend Beaton, in excessive zeal, wanted Mauritius to become an outpost for the evangelization of India. However, they were soon disillusioned. These immigrants seemed to be made of a different metal. They were deeply attached to their religious and philosophical values and were strongly reluctant to renounce them. Firmly grounded in their culture and tradition, proud of their identity, but owing to misfortune, uprooted from their motherland, the core values and principles embedded in their philosophy of life was what gave them solace and hope. It can be recalled that the application of force in proselytism is legendary in India, but this has always backlashed into stronger resolve and determination to resist on the side of the people. The Greeks, the Mughals, the Europeans met with mitigated success during their respective occupation of India. The rest of the subcontinent had rallied behind revivalists like Chanakya, Tulsidas, Swami Dayanand, and Mahatma Gandhi. The land could be occupied, not the spirit, which holds even stronger to its core values and principles in moments of despair and fret. How did India survive years of occupation and yet preserve its ancient tradition? I believe part of the answer lies in the very structure of the Indian village. It is rural India that actually preserves and perpetuates in several ways the religious and philosophical values of its past. The panchayat, for instance, plays more than just an administrative role. Its members are equally the custodian of the values and wisdom that the community has inherited since time immemorial. Mahatma Gandhi's social ideology was not obsolete when he claimed that the Indian village system should be promoted instead of uncontrolled industrialization. He saw in the panchayat the political, social, and religious freedom of India. A situation not much different was unfolding in Mauritius during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Replicating the Indian panchayat, baitkas were set up in each settlement of Mauritius, where the elders discussed strategies of resistance against the evils that endangered their identity. In order to bring the ancient wisdoms inherent in the epics, the Ramayana and the Gita Mandalis, which were set up, shlokas, dohas, and chaupais were chanted, and their lessons were imparted. Away from their homeland, the migrants fell back upon their religious values and philosophical principles, most of which were already diffused in the texts they had brought with them, the Ramcharitmanas and the Mahabharata. They identified themselves with the characters in the epics, whose existential predicaments were not foreign to their own. In the former, the prince's exiles, Sita's abduction, while in the latter, the destiny of the Pandavas, mirrored their own conditions on an island, the name of which reminded them of Ravan's Lanka. During those days of moral and spiritual crisis, Ram's journey to free his spouse, Arjuna's dilemma, and Lord Krishna's message became for these desperate laborers sources of inspiration and models to be emulated. The Rakshasas, in the form of poverty, ignorance, injustice, exploitation, and humiliation, had to be annihilated with the selflessness of Nishkam Karma, adherence to Dharma, and the determination of a Maryada Purushottam. With these countermeasures in place, India's values seemed preserved, but the tenacity of the proselytes did not get dampened. The monetary and governmental machinery were put to full use, and various mechanisms were devised with the aim of making life miserable for the migrants to such an extent that a refuge in the salutary arms of missionaries would seem the only alternative. All possible weakness and shortcomings were identified and converted into a powerful weapon of conversion, the most lethal of which was poverty. The dire conditions in which the coolies lived was a strong argument for promises for a better life in a different religious context. Unemployment forced many to abandon their faith. The basic needs always comes first. Prayers do not extinguish the fire of hunger, whereas food does. That is why it is not surprising in Mauritius to come across Christians with Tamil or Telugu family names. This method of conversion appears to have been more successful in a neighboring island of Réunion, where laborers came mostly from Tamil Nadu. The reluctance and resistance demonstrated by the migrants, rooted as they were in their faith and culture, made it difficult for missionaries to plow and sow seeds of conversion. The minds of the children, however, were still fertile and thus full of room for other religious beliefs to sprout. Government-run schools became their target, and imposition of Christian precepts and imparting of biblical knowledge in the name of education acted as subtle modes of conditioning and this conversion. British administrators like Governor Nicolay, for instance, did not much to improve the situation. It was in 1839 that the government established a national system of education. Though education was introduced, it was not getting the expected success. This is because the coolies had sensed the strategy to steal the future from them. In 1851, Governor Higginson drew attention to the fact that the great number of savage Indian immigrant children were left to themselves and needed urgent attention. This Macaulayist observation paved the way for the introduction of compulsory education in Mauritius. Compulsory education following biblical lines further implied that the medium of instruction would be either English or French. The tug of war between the church and the state to impose its language ended up into the latter being unofficial, yet popular, and the former, that is English being official but unpopular. The historical primacy of French played to its advantage. However, this situation posed a serious threat to the languages spoken by the Indian immigrants. It became clear to them that the true agenda behind compulsory education was the acculturation of the Indian mind. Since language is the vehicle of the religious and philosophical ideas of a culture, the elimination of one naturally entails the disappearance of the other. This mode of acculturation was particularly successful in Réunion and the West Indies. From a linguistic perspective, Anglicization of names through distortion of words meant that migrants had English names. This mispronunciation of names aimed at creating a distance between the culturally rooted meaning and the identity of the individual who bore it. This disaccentuation, owing to the use of Roman characters instead of the original Nagri, would further alter the meaning and convey a different sense. Ultimately, The expected outcome was to bring about a shift in traditional and cultural practices with a gradual decay of the original in favor of the new one. On the face of these powerful and diverse attempts at de-Indianization, deliberately calculated and implemented to erode all trace of Indianness from their lives and those of their children, the immigrants responded with stronger determination to preserve their ancient wisdom of their forefathers. These were diffused throughout the scriptures and rituals. The mandalis and the bedkas were in this context crucial. Realizing this danger, but still feeling the need to educate their children, while at the same time preserving their Indian origins, the coolies saw in the bedka the ideal solution. Emulating the Gurukul system, these often rudimentary constructions became cultural centers and abodes of Indian philosophy and religion. While during the day it played an educational role, in the evening it assumed a socio-political dimension where more serious matters were raised and debated. They were also used as venues for social and religious events. On religious occasions, Ram Leela, Indra Sabha, and other popular plays were played along with rites, performed along with rites and rituals. They were likewise used as wedding halls. Resistance against proselytism gathered greater momentum in the middle of the 20th century. An organization to have played an important role in the preservation, promotion, and propagation of Indian values has been the Arya Samaj. The Vedic ideals preached by Swami Dayanand in his Satyatra Prakash first reached the island through a sepoy. The zeal with which the Swami, in his crusades against social and religious evils, inspired many of his admirers in the island. Like the Bedkas, the Arya Samaj also opened branches in Hindu settlements. Its work was further catalyzed by the visit of Mahatma Gandhi in 1901. He listened to the sad stories of misery and injustice faced by his compatriots and promised help. He sent Manilal Doctor, a lawyer, to fight for their rights. Manilal Doctor's efforts brought justice to many, and many to justice. He became the champion of voiceless immigrants. His efforts inspired other migrants to fight for their rights, with the result that greater political power was acquired and independence sought for. After independence, a more democratic system of education was set up, and the Bedkas and the Mandalis gradually lost their influence. Their historic role has been now taken over by more powerful socio-religious organizations, like, to name a few, the Mauritius Sanatan Dharma Temple Federation, the Hindu House, the Arya Sabha, the Hindi Pracharani Sabha, the Mauritius Arya Vived Sabha, the Mauritius Andhra Sabha, the Mauritius Marathi Mandali Federation, the Mauritius Tamil Temples Federation. These groups form a powerful political lobby, and their agenda consists primarily in safeguarding those values which the migrants brought with them and defended so courageously. They see to it that most of the religious observances practiced in India are faithfully followed in Little India. Their efforts to preserve the language of India has helped in their integration into the national curriculum framework at primary and secondary levels, while undergraduate and postgraduate courses are offered at tertiary level. Indian philosophy is likewise taught at both secondary and tertiary levels. In addition, a revival of interest towards ancestral languages also has been noted. There is a surge in the awareness of the necessity of learning Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, and Bhojpuri, which are the vectors of Indian culture. The number of students enrolling for Sanskrit courses, especially among adults, indicates a quest for cultural identity and spiritual wisdom. Recognizing the role and importance of philosophical values and principles expressed in Indian languages, a speaking union for each Indian language has also been set up by the government of Mauritius. Popular utsavas and tyohars like Mahashivratri, Deepavali, Taipusam, Sitrai Kaveri, Ugadi, Ganesh Chaturthi, Holi, Durga Puja, Ram Navami not only reflect the diversity of Hindu religion and culture, but also indicate that the Indian immigrants came from all states of India. It is therefore by the unflinching faith on the universality and the eternality of moral and spiritual values inherent in Indian philosophy that Mauritius was gradually transformed. The triumph of the indentured laborers is to a great extent attributed to their spirit of tolerance and endurance, to their wisdom and beliefs, to their patience and resilience. These are nothing but the expression of the philosophical and ethical principles encapsulated in popular works, like the Ramayana and Bhagavad Gita, and which are diffused in their religious and cultural practices. While real gold was impossible to be mined from volcanic rocks simply by lifting them, the faith and hard work of these coolies and Malabaris no doubt created both tangible and intangible wealth from the land. In so doing, the Pravasis of Mauritius created a unique worldview, a different value system closely linked with but not completely similar to its Indian counterpart. So calling it merely an outpost of Indian philosophy would be undervaluing its contribution to India and Asia. The present paper serves only as a preamble to further research on the various facets of the Mauritian version of Indian culture and philosophy. I end here thanking you for bearing patiently with me. I would like to congratulate the HRSRC for having organized this prestigious conference and express my sincere gratitude for giving me the opportunity to present my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajendra Kumar Debe from Mauritius. Now, we invite your participation. You can ask any questions if you have. The chair and our scholars will reply to your questions. If you have any question, please feel free to ask.
So I would like to ask Professor Murthy whether the Chetty in Malacca trace their route to South India. In what part of South India? Last month I visited Malacca. You may be surprised to know that the word Malacca is from Amalaka, a tree. I thought it was a European name.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Malacca comes from a tree. The name, it's actually, I'm not sure which year, but it was in the 14th century. A Hindu prince from the island of Sumatra called Paramiswara. He probably would not be an Indian origin, he'd probably be a native Malay, but he was a Hindu. And he came to Malacca, and he was resting in a place very close to the river. And he was astonished to see the bravery of a mouse deer, right? A mouse deer fighting a dog. That's his dogs, you know. The dog attacked the mouse deer. The mouse deer was very brave, and you know. So he was astonished with that incident and asked the followers, "Where am I resting here? Which place? What is the name of this tree? What tree is this?" And the follower says, "This is the Malacca tree." All right. So they said, "Okay, we will call this place Malacca, and I will create a state." All right. That is one way. The other one, Malacca is also another origin, which is an Arabic word for market, if I'm not mistaken. All right. So there are few versions of this. The earlier version, which is written in the Malay annals about the history of Malacca, was this. This is the incident, all right, by Hindu prince from Palembang in Sumatra, Indonesian island. As for their origins, they are actually originated from South India. There are traces that they are Tamils, actually, and they were called as Moors. These are the Tamil Moors. Some of the literature, because there is not much of literature has been written on the Malacca Chittis. I think one book was published by one of my colleagues quite recently, about a month back, on the Malacca Chittis. Other than that, I think I have 2 articles on them, and I think there are only a handful historical material has been written on this community. So, if that answers your question, thank you.
I am from Tamil Nadu. What you are mentioning is not in Tamil Nadu, one area, Karaikudi area. It is called as Chettinadu. Chettinadu, not Chitti. It is Chetti. Chetti means business, Vaishyas. Chetty. So they are called Natukottai Chettiars, Nagarattar. The Malay wall, those who are living in the hills area, Vanavasis, are called as Malay wall. This Amman is Mari Amman, chicken, all these chicken pox, Mari Amman. In north, Chitra Devi is there. It is in Tamil Nadu, it is called as Mari Amman. So you have to visit that Karaikudi place area. Most of the Shetty community people, even now they are going to Malaysia, they are having business contact, all these things. If you visit Tamil Nadu, I will help you. Thank you.
So I would like to refer to the paper by the scholar from Shanghai. So I appreciate the paper very much. You have given important information about Chinese tradition of Buddhist logic, etc., etc. So, of course, my remark may not be directly related with what you have presented, but I would like to share an information, perhaps many of you know it already. It is regarding the starting of printing in China. Sometime in 757 AD, so there it is mentioned by Professor Raghuvira, the eminent father of our great historian, Professor Lokesandra. So perhaps, yes, he found in China when he visited several times, Professor Lokesandra says, that he found an account there in China, probably in Peking, that sometime in 757 AD, when printing started in China, the first paper which was printed was a Chinese translation of a Sanskrit verse addressed to the goddess of learning, Saraswati. Of course, I cannot right now reproduce, but it is in Sanskrit. I have read from about this from Lokesandra's books, one of Lokesandra's books. So that way, printing in China started with has reference to Sanskrit. So that is number one. And number two is that sometime in 971 AD, so when printing works began, printing activities took up very seriously, starting from Chengdu. That time, of course, the first printed works were on Tripitaka. So this also is mentioned in Professor Raghuvira's accounts. So this point, so our Honorable Chairman has mentioned about the translation of Sanskrit works much earlier by Kumarajiva and other Sanskrit, the monks who came from China, from Khotan. So they came on horses, white horses, so loaded with scriptures from China. And the Chinese emperors, starting from Emperor Ming of the Eastern Han Dynasty, so appreciated very much because he appreciated two things. One is the horses, which symbolize power, and the other is the scriptures, which stand for the virtues. And so far as these two these two virtues, cardinal virtues are concerned, these have been very much there in the Confucian tradition. So that was the case. So the actual the translation works started sometime in the 4th century AD or so. So this is what I would like to add. Thank you very much.
In continuation with the discussion with Professor Ramachandran Murthy, the term, he also spoke about the Arabic word. In Arabic, there are two terms very close to this term, malakun and malak. Malakun. Malakun and malakun. Malakun means owner. Malakun means the angel. Amantu billahi or malaikatihi. Malaik, that means the people of angels or angels basically. So those who are claiming that they are malak people, they are maybe correspond to this word malakun, the people of the heavenly angels. It has very resemblance with the Zulu community. They are also, Zulu means the people of heaven. So one time I was in 2016, I was in Malaysia, and we were discussing about this, the origin of Malak community. So I think it is much more reasonable to it. Thank you.
So I think questions from our other guests are over. I would now request the chair, Professor S. R. Bhatt, to come and give his comments.
Friends, we had very illuminating presentations from three learned scholars. One point which I would like to add is that spread of Indian philosophy was not only towards the eastern side, but also towards the western side. And say for example, Al-Baruni has given a very succinct account of how Indian philosophy and Indian culture went to the western side. Particularly the concept of zero, shunya, and the decimal system. And say this place value of numericals. Well, that is in fact a very not only significant but revolutionary contribution of Indian mind to the world culture and civilization. There could not have been development of mathematics without introduction of zero and decimal system. Pythagoras, of course, the way we have Shulva Sutras and other sutras where geometry and trigonometry are being expounded, well, they are much I should say simpler as well as more sophisticated than the one that we find in the Western. Of course, I am not saying that we should be proud of that, but I am just referring to our contribution. And I think our contribution should be acknowledged. Likewise, there has been tremendous impact of Vedanta on Arab world and on Iran also. The entire movement of Sufis is heavily influenced. There are two Sufi traditions. One is monastic, where you find similarity with Shankar Vedanta, and other is monotheistic, where you find similarities with Ramanuja Vedanta, and there has been close interaction between the Sufi thinkers and the Vedantic thinkers. But prior to that also, as I referred earlier on, there was a good interaction between Greek thinkers and Indian thinkers. And it's a matter of research as to what extent Indian thought influenced the Greek thought. Anyway, we had a very fruitful deliberation, and these deliberations are academically useful in terms of encouraging us to do more and more researches. And the researches should be not only based on literary sources, but also based on archaeological sources, which is more important. Archaeology is not much developed in some of these countries. For example, in Arab countries or in Iran, they don't pay much attention to archaeology. But even in countries of the eastern side, archaeology is not a very well developed science. And I think Indian archaeologists should take up this sort of research. And another area of closer contact has been in terms of music. Indian music has very much influenced the music of East Asian countries. So sometimes we have some similarities so far as musical instruments are concerned, but musical intonations also are very much common. And in a book which I have edited on relation between India and Korea, there is a paper by a Korean scholar who pointed out that Korean music was very much influenced by Bharatanatyam and this Bharat Muni. So, and many Tamil words are common in Korea. What is the Appa and Amma? They are common between South India and, of course, in North India also we use our Amma and Appa. We don't use Amma, we do use. The point therefore is that there should be closer cultural contexts, and these cultural contexts should be made use of for propagation of universal brotherhood, universal peace, and universal prosperity. So I think we may now conclude our deliberations, and I thank the scholarly paper presenters, as also I thank the audience, the enlightened audience, who have very patiently listened to the deliberations and also contributed by way of intervention. Thank you very much. Now we shall have felicitation program, and then we will thereafter discuss.
I will request Yogesh Bhai Patel to please come over on stage and felicitate our speakers. And I'll request Ila Ben kindly come and bring the flowers and memento. Professor Rajendra Kumar Debe from Mauritius. Then we have Professor Ravi Chandran Murthy from Malaysia. And Professor Dang Mingjun from Shanghai, China. So with this, we end this special preliminary session. Tomorrow again we are meeting at 10. And I would request Professor Bala to come and give tomorrow's brief, that how we are going to organize in morning one session and we have certain parallel sessions as well.
Yeah, it's a long day that we had today because we started at around 9:30 and it's almost 9 o'clock, 12 hours academic sessions continuously. Thank you so much for all your cooperation, and your patience and energy levels are really tested. Thank you for your cooperation in this regard. And this particular session is co-sponsored by SRMT, Sri Ramanuja Trust, and we are quite unfortunate that the Swamiji could not come here and he could not participate, and none of them from the trust could come here, but from the beginning they were there with us and they wanted to have this special session. So thanks to all of them, and thanks to the speakers and the chair here. There are a few announcements that I want to, that I would like to make, and yeah, we had two plenary sessions and one parallel session today, and tomorrow morning we will reassemble at 10 a.m. and we will have in the morning plenary sessions, two plenary sessions, and then we will also have two parallel sessions in the afternoon. So that with that the program ends. Actually, towards the end of the program, the organizing institution, HSRC, Holistic Science Research Center, will have 1 hour time with us. No? In the sense that we would like to have an interactive session with the founder of HSRC. Kanu Dadaji will be available with us, and see, all of you might have seen the place, and also you might have listened to the papers that were presented on Dada Bhagwan's philosophy and thought. So if you have any comments, or if you have any thoughts to share, or if you have any doubts to get clarified, it would be interesting. We can have a discussion, you know, with Kanu Dadaji. He would be available here. He is the founder, and he was with Dada Bhagwan for a long time. So that is towards the end of tomorrow's program. So I request all of you to participate in that with equal enthusiasm. And if there are any comments that you would like to make, we welcome all of them. And Institute also would make certain announcements regarding its academic activities tomorrow. Yeah, there is one more interesting announcement that I forgot to make. Yeah. Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, we are going to have yoga session in the open space. So those who are interested to participate in that, we welcome them all. No? You will be provided tea as well, but yoga also would be there. And after the dinner, you would be provided, the scholars who are staying outside would be provided the transportation to your respective places. Thank you so much.